Okay. We're almost done. There's just 3 more chapters to go. Fiscal policy. So we've talked about the banking system. We've talked about monetary policy in terms of managing the economy to get out of recessionary gaps and inflationary gaps. Now we actually want to talk about politicians getting involved. And they're going to do this through their powers to spend money and to tax. So just as expansionary monetary policy meant increasing the money supply, we're going to have expansionary fiscal policy, which consists of increasing government spending or reducing taxes. And then we're going to also have contractionary fiscal policy, which would consist of raising taxes and lowering government spending. And again, you would do these things to get out of a recessionary gap or an inflationary gap. You would employ expansionary fiscal policy to get out of a recessionary gap. That would be what Bush and Obama did back in 2008, right? To get out of that recession or the oncoming crisis, spend a lot of government money, right? That's expansionary fiscal policy. And then, again, you would get out of the inflationary gap with the contractionary fiscal policy. Now, that fiscal policy actually can take 2 forms. One form of it can be discretionary, and the other form of it can be automatic. So to have discretionary fiscal policy, that would be something like 2008. A decision was made to spend more money, and so it was spent. But most fiscal policy isn't discretionary. Most of it is actually automatic. So the way that the tax system is set up, when people lose their job, as they would during a recession, right, they're not taxed as much, right, because they're taxed as a percentage of their income. Also, during a recession, the government automatically is going to spend more money because people are going to need food stamps, people are going to have to go on like disability payments for Social Security, they're going to start to collect unemployment insurance, right? The way that the budget is set up, it's set up to automatically spend more money and tax less in a recessionary gap, and to spend less and tax more in an inflationary gap. Okay, so now in terms of that tax system actually is going to take 3 different forms. It can be progressive, regressive, or proportional. We in the United States have a progressive tax system. That means that as your income goes up, the marginal rate, the rate that you're charged per dollar earned, increases. So, in our case, right, and I think if you look, these are somewhat updated. They're not the most up to date. But if you look on page 2 of the typed up lecture notes, you basically see that the first $75.50 in earnings is taxed at 10%. Now, for every dollar I earn over $75.50, up to $36.50 is going to be taxed at a slightly higher rate, 15%. Then from 30 to 74, it's going to be taxed at 25%. These are tax brackets. And for a progressive tax system, the tax brackets progressively get higher and higher as you earn more income. This is designed to basically redistribute wealth. If you look at the statistics, more than half the taxes is paid by the top few percent of income earners. And there's a significant portion of the population that pays very little in taxes. It's a tax system designed to redistribute wealth. Whether you agree or disagree with that, go vote if you agree or disagree with it. But not only is it paying the bills, but it also has a social role behind it. Now, for a proportional tax system, you would see that in things like the sales tax, right? Everyone is basically charged the same constant percent, regardless of how much you're actually spending, right? We all pay, in Wisconsin, we pay, I think it's like 5.5%, right? Slightly different in slightly different communities, but everything is charged at that price. There's a few exceptions, like food. We don't put a sales tax on food or on prescription drugs, but everyone is charged a constant percent. And then we finally have a regressive tax system, where actually the tax rate would actually fall as one earns more. The idea behind that would be that then as those who earn a great deal are taxed less, that they would then actually like create jobs or spend more money and put more money into the economy. Okay, so when we look at what the government taxing and then spending money, if we start to look at budgetary issues in terms of the budget, right? Let's start to write out a few things here. Right. Obviously, if tax revenue is equal to government expenditures, there would be neither a surplus nor a deficit. If taxes are greater than government spending, then we obviously have a budget surplus. And that if taxes are less than government expenditures, which is what we're facing right now, then we have a budget deficit. The summation of the deficits, right, if we add up all the deficits over all the years, that would equal the debt. The debt right now is about 100% of our GDP. There's a lot of misnomers about the debt. Most of the debt is actually owned by us. We own most of the debt here in the United States. We actually owe the money to ourselves. Through systems like the Social Security system, which is required to buy U.S. debt. The Federal Reserve buys a lot of U.S. debt. It's a misnomer to think that those who live outside the U.S., China, Japan, own most of the U.S. debt. In fact, it's I wouldn't say a small amount, but it's certainly not the majority of the bonds that we have issued. We've almost always had a debt, almost always, since we were founded. So, history is a pretty good guide. If we've always had a debt, how can it be so bad? Now, states are generally required to balance their budget every year, but the federal government does not have to do that. In fact, you'll see oftentimes, many times in the news, discussion that we do have a debt limit. So Congress, in this case, the federal government can only issue so much debt as determined by Congress. And when that limit is reached, Congress has to go pass a law to increase that amount that we can lend out. So you would see that we've had various budget crises where the government had to shut down back in the 90s, and most recently it didn't shut down, but it came very, very close to shutting down. And it did that because we had surpassed the debt limit that was given to us by Congress. Now, the deficit that we could have on an annual basis, it doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. The reason why it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing is because there's two kinds of deficits. There's a structural deficit and there's a cyclical deficit. A structural deficit would mean that even when the economy is doing well, we're deficient in funding. That is the case for us. Even when the economy is doing very well, back in 2005, 2006, we were still running a deficit. So I would clearly say we have some issues that we have to take care of. But it would be natural to have a bit of a deficit during a recession. That would be known as a cyclical deficit. So a structural deficit, cyclical deficit, these are both components of the total deficit. Just as in the case of unemployment, it consisted of natural unemployment and cyclical unemployment. Okay, I think I'm going to stop the video here and pick it up with the just one final lecture. I'll just kind of cover the last of the material for fiscal policy.